Welcome everyone to the UbiOps Monthly meeting that we have. We've just released new functionality to UbiOps, what is it now, 1.5 weeks ago or so. And we wanted to give you an update on what actually changed in this last release and some general updates on some other things that we've been working on as a team. So this is the agenda. So first I'll just give you a short introduction of who I exactly am in case you don't know me. Then I'll walk you through the new features we've released, and I'll give you an update on the partners and integrations that we've been working on. And I will shortly also touch upon what we are currently working on and what will come to you hopefully soon, after which we have some time for some questions and discussion. So nice to meet you. I'm Anouk. I'm the product owner at UbiOps. I have a background in nanobiology and computer science from the TU Delft. And I'm mainly concerned with the new functionalities we're adding to UbiOps and what we should be working on and the product roadmap. So I'm very excited to show you the new things or the new features we've worked on. The first one being the R client library that we have released. In the release before this last one, we already released R support so that you can now also deploy R code. But to make it nicer to also deploy R code and for these R developers that are amongst our users, we've also focused on creating an R client library, just like we have for Python, to make it even easier so that you can also interact with UbiOps programmatically via R. It works very similar to the Python one that we have, and there's an example notebook on our GitHub walking you through all the different ways you can use it. I can quickly show you as well. I have it here. So I've just downloaded the R client library quick start from our GitHub. And as you can see, it's quite similar to the Python quick start we have. So first we get a sample deployment package, which we use just to show the functionalities of the R client library. There's a minor difference with the R client library and the Python client library in terms of how you can set it up. With the Python client library, you always have to continuously pass your project name. But for the R client library, we actually can set that in an environment variable so that you don't have to pass it continuously, but that you only have to set it once at the beginning when you initialize the client library and basically like set it and forget it so that you continue to work on it. And you can see the token should be passed in this way as well, just like you're used to with the Python client library. And in this quick start, we just show you how to deploy a simple deployment that multiplies a number by a random other number, I believe. But in this notebook that you can find on the GitHub repository, everything is explained of how it works. But as you can see, it's quite similar to the Python one. So that's the R client library. Then the next thing we released was the ability to now store and query requests. This was already possible for batch requests, but we've now also made it possible for direct requests so that you can store all the requests that you've made, which can be handy for data analysis later on, or when you want to backtrack, or for instance, when there was a request that failed and you actually don't really know why it failed and you want to inspect more, that you can retrieve what exact request caused that failure, for instance. To be able to store these requests, we don't automatically or there are a few different ways in which you can store it. So these can be set with the retention mode. When you make a deployment, you can set the retention mode, and there are three different modes. You can set it to none, then we don't store anything. No metadata, not the request data. So then nothing is stored. You can store metadata only. So that's when was the request made? Was it a failure? Was it a success? And we also have the option to store the full request information. So that's the metadata plus also the exact data which you used in the request. So the numbers you send as input, for instance. And when you set the retention mode to metadata or full, you also have the ability to set the request retention time. So for how long these requests should be stored. Sometimes it's nice to only store it for like 1 day, but sometimes you want to store it for longer. And the minimum, I believe, is 1 hour. I can show you how that looks as well in the web app. So this is one of our sample projects, and I've just picked one deployment that we use quite a bit. And this deployment has full retention mode. So when you go to the deployment and to the general information of a version, so you can set this per version, you can check what the request retention mode is. For this one, it's full. So it stores the metadata and the request in an output, and the request retention time is 1 week. So after 1 week, everything will be deleted. And these stored requests can then be viewed in the request tab that you see here. So if I go there, you can see some of the previous requests I've made in the last week, and you can get the results of it. So you can inspect what actually happened in that request. For metadata, you wouldn't be able to actually get the result and see the request data, for instance. And if you want to alter it, so if you want to change the request retention mode, then you can edit your deployment. And there you can see that you can edit the request retention and the request retention time. So that's where you can set it. And this can also be done with the client library, but I'm just showing it here via the web app because it's a bit easier to show. That's that. And then lastly, what I wanted to touch upon is the new monitoring page that we've added. You might have noticed this in the UI as well. This is a monitoring page to be able to compare different deployments and pipelines, but also to aggregate metrics. So for instance, to aggregate all the metrics in your project so that you can see the overview of everything that's going on in your project instead of having to go to every single deployment to check how it's going. So I can also show you that in our demo project. So here right now, I'm showing the aggregated metrics of everything that's going on in this project. So you can check the request per second, how much credits have been used, and the successful request and the failed requests. In this case, there weren't any failed requests, so that's why there are no bar charts here. And you can also select a specific version. So for instance, this model. So I have 2 versions of this model. I have a predictor, and one is trained on 1 epoch and the other one on 20. And I can plot them both side by side in the monitoring page. So this can be handy if you want to compare how different versions of the same deployment, for instance, are doing, or different versions of the same pipeline. And then you can check how they compare to one another. So that's the monitoring page. And those are actually the new features I wanted to touch upon. Other than that, we had some minor additions as well, but these were the key 3 things that we've just released. And as said, I wanted to also give you a short update on partners and integrations, because we've been working a lot with partners lately, because we realize UbiOps is not the only piece of software in your architecture. UbiOps needs to work together with other tools, and it's handy to know how you can connect different tools to really take care of the full data science lifecycle. And one of these partners that we worked with is Pachyderm. We've released an article about this, you might have seen it. Pachyderm actually comes in the phase before UbiOps, and they're very good with training and retraining and setting up pipelines for that as well. And one of the main things that they do, or what they're good at, is incrementality. So when, for instance, you have trained a model on already like 1 terabyte of data, and you've got 1 gigabyte of extra data coming in, you don't want to retrain everything on that 1 terabyte plus that 1 gigabyte. That's, of course, a lot of training. So the option, what they have, is to only update with that extra data that you added in, so that you don't have to go over the entire cycle again when retraining and when updating. And we've written about an example of how you can put Pachyderm and UbiOps side by side, basically. And the example architecture of what we've done in the article you can see here. So we had a model that was trained on face data, and this data was stored in Pachyderm. And in Pachyderm, we had this training pipeline. And whenever this training pipeline was triggered by new data, for instance, then after the training is done, it would also trigger UbiOps to deploy this model with this newly trained model so that it's updated in production as well. And you can check out the article for more info on exactly how this is done. But it's basically train, retrain, deploy, and serve. That's kind of the flow that we've looked at with Pachyderm. Then another one we've worked with is Arthur.ai. Arthur.ai is a monitoring platform. And of course, UbiOps does a bit of monitoring, but sometimes there's a need for more data science specific monitoring, and we realized that. So we decided to look for partners that are really good at this monitoring side. And Arthur.ai is one of them. They're especially very good at things like explainability, if you really need insights on the explainability of your model. And we've also written an article for an example of how to set these side by side as well. In this case, I believe it was either a TensorFlow or an XGBoost model. I'm not entirely sure on the top of my head. That was deployed on UbiOps for predicting housing prices, and Arthur.ai was used to monitor things like data drift and anomaly detection on the side. Arthur.ai was not the only monitoring tool we looked at. Another one is Arise, which you might have seen, I think, yesterday that we posted it. And Arise is also is very good with a bunch of different monitoring things. They just tackle it a bit differently than Arthur.ai, where Arthur.ai is more focused on the explainability. Arise is more focused on things like feature stores and evaluation stores. And we've also published, like in the article, an example of how you can run these two side by side to gain more insights in what's running in UbiOps, basically, and how your model is doing. So if you need anything more on the monitoring side next to UbiOps, be sure to check those two out. We can highly recommend them. It was really nice working with them, and it was really easy to set something up as well. So that's it. Or one more thing in terms of partners and integrations, the next thing we're going to look at, because we're still continuing this and we try to continuously find new partners for missing parts in the stack or in the software stack, which could be nice to have next to UbiOps. And the next thing we're working on is having a model of in UbiOps and coupling it to a dashboard in Tableau to show how that's done. So that will be the new one coming out. And then what are the next steps? Like, what are the things we are working on at the moment? At the moment, we're primarily working on long-running requests or batch type requests. Right now, there's a max out or a maximum duration a request can have. And we know that sometimes you just have a request that should take longer or that needs longer than what we currently allow. So that's why we're working very hard in making that possible, so that hopefully soon it will be possible to run requests that, for instance, take up to like 24 hours. So perhaps a training job that just takes very long, or when there's a really large chunk of data. So that's the main thing we're working on. Other than that, we're continuing with integrations and plugins to make it easier to seamlessly connect UbiOps to other tools that might be handy, and some UX improvements just to improve the user experience. For instance, to make it possible to do in-place editing of your deployments, to make it easier that if you make a mistake when making a deployment, that you can easily fix it without having to make a new deployment, for instance. And that's it on what I wanted to share with you guys. So yeah, thank you for listening and for watching. If there are any questions, I would gladly hear them.